just showers.
Yeah. Well, it's just a bit stuff, I think.
Yeah, they...
There's none that would kill anything. And the citrus blossom was just one side of trees.
Just got chops and fries, isn't it? Those sorts of things.
Like satellite crops.
Thanks.
But,
I would sit there with you, but it's just too close to the post.
Yes.
Not many people.
How you going?
it's very low, isn't it?
Now, why would you spend that money on what yourself? Nice glasses. No, nothing sold for the developer again. You better would have been better saving your funds.
Yeah, it was long, when long we had a bit of history together, so they really impressed with them. Anyone before, so twice actually in 3 years.
It was a very good game.
He was. I nearly thought what a big joke when they were saying, I thought, just back that was 3 goals in front of us. And they had to say, we get good time, you can't be kicking the ball. But it was not good.
Well, from there, I'll tell you, last explosives.
I agree with this commentator, it's the longest quarter I think.
Earwigs or wind or running out.
Why was it so?
Yep, I'm ready.
We're ready to... Yeah, we'll get ready. We might have something wrong on the
It's still there, halfway through it.
Alrighty. Thank you. We haven't got a huge turnout, but I've always believed quality is better than quantity. They get 100,000 people at the MCG and for the grand final, and you get all sorts. So I won't say anything more. I get myself in trouble. Tonight, thank you for coming on too, by the way. Now I do know there are a few other things happening tonight, but it's sort of like whenever you choose a date, there's always things happening, so that's okay. Tonight Neale is going to be giving us a bit of a talk about China and understanding how the Chinese think, but just by way of a bit of background, because some of you may have been here when Neale last spoke about 18 months ago. And Neale's been based in Hong Kong for now about 16 years, roughly. He went over there, his specialisation was management accounting, which I suppose is a traditional discipline, but really has gotten into the whole, looking at US-Chinese joint venture arrangements and how does Western and Chinese companies, how do they deal with that cultural clash when it meets at the organisation level. And looking at supply chain management, which obviously is a big issue because China is the factory for a lot of Western companies these days, and so supply chain management becomes a really big issue in that context. And the key being really getting some sort of insight into the Chinese psyche and how is the Chinese think, because they certainly think different to us in a number of different ways. So Neale, as I said, he's been based in Hong Kong now for 16 years, teaches extensively in a lot of postgraduate programs, MBA programs up in Shanghai, spends a lot of time there. And I've always wondered why they called it Shanghai and not Slingshot, but anyway, that's just one question I have, why they didn't call it Slingshot. But apart from that, that's basically a bit of Neale's background, and enough for me, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Larry, and thanks for coming. And I think big thanks to La Trobe University, because La Trobe University was where I first enrolled for my PhD a long, long time ago, nearly 20 years ago. So they gave me that that institutional opening opportunity. Otherwise, I could be still in China teaching English instead. So I was able to move up the totem pole a little bit and offer some more value-added services in Hong Kong and China. Look, I can cover all of these. I'll quickly go through some of these. The last time I presented here, I covered the buyer perspective, and I gave you some insight about what large buyers, how they manage their Chinese suppliers. And we were talking about the HTCs, the Apples, the Toshibas, all the large consumer manufacturers. This time I wanted to share briefly about the supplier side. How does the supplier see this side of the relationship? And some of you are probably thinking, okay, so what's that, how does that help me, or what is the practical reality of that? Well, the more you understand how the supplier manages things, then the better you're able to manage the supplier. And sort of like not taking you're taking a more empathetic perspective on the relationship. It's not what you're trying to get out of it, it's how you can help the supplier get what they want. Then they'll help you get what you want. And I think if there's nothing else to take away tonight, I think that's the big thing, all right? And it probably just doesn't go for China, but it goes for many things in life. So I can talk about what Chinese suppliers care about. I'll give you briefly a Taiwanese best practice case and some initial results of an interview survey study that I'm in the process of doing, and that is 1,000 interviews of Chinese suppliers. Not 10, not 100, but 1,000. And last week we got up to 296. So we're about 1/3 there. We'll finish it by next year. And why 1,000? Because it will be the largest ever interview study done on Chinese suppliers ever. And I want to not only make an impression in terms of publication, but in terms of speaking to industry and helping industry practice. So we'll talk about initial results from that. And probably finally, most interesting to many of you is importing from China or exporting to China. And I'll give you a brief example of a factory audit, and I can spend a little bit more time on that. So let's do last first. And here are the tips I would give to someone who's interested in importing from China. And probably the biggest tip I could give you is go next door and talk to Richard in Oceanic Imports. And he could probably teach you more than what I could, and because he's actually doing it. And if you go into his shop, what do you see? You see just about everything, not just one or two things. Because the strategy is, if you start with a bricks and mortar store, you fill it up with everything and you find out what works and what doesn't. And then you start to order more of what is working. And there are 4 things that are working at the moment. Solar panels, okay, refrigerators, poolside fence protectors, and temporary construction fence protectors. So that's what's working at the moment. That's what Richard shared with me. It's very interesting, but he's got many other things in the shop, and that's his strategy, and that's how you would start if you're importing from China. Bricks and mortar, then you may move to the internet, you may move to eBay, and then go to wholesale, and there's much greater things to do from there. All right, so, but if you're getting started in that area, you would think about pricing. Everyone thinks about price first up. My advice is that should be the last thing you think about. And especially after tonight, when I give you some insights about what Chinese suppliers are doing, it will just bring to how important it is not to emphasise price too much initially. It should be emphasising more on the delivery, the service, the quality, and then price after that. If you emphasise price first, you may be shortchanged on the other things that really do matter. Quality inspection payment, that's one thing I want to impress upon you, especially with the factory audit that I'll show brief details on later. Shipping arrangement, customs agents, there are many shipping agents and customs agents, anyone can find them to do that part. But the big mistake that a lot of people make when importing from China is in the quality inspection and payment. A lot of people think, oh, I'll save on the quality inspection and just pay the money and hope for the best. And you really are hoping for the best, and quality inspection is just, it's insurance, and it's insurance that you must have when importing from China. So that was last first. So as I go through my study, some of the things that were known from my study, the things I'll pull out, will actually emphasise some of these things, which are very practical for anyone interested in importing from China. So the buyer perspective, I did talk about this last time, so I'm going to skip over it. But of these big things that buyers do care about, forecasting. I asked the operations manager of HTC 18 months ago, what is your biggest challenge? Getting the forecast right. Getting the forecast right. If I can get the forecast right, I can manage everything else in the supply chain. And suppliers want good forecasts too, because they want the buyer to be honest in terms of their promise and what they actually order. Okay? But a lot of buyers will actually order 80% of what they promise, because they want suppliers to carry capacity, and the buyer doesn't want to have to carry the inventory. So there's this game being played in the big league when we're talking about major consumer electronics buyers and the supplying factories in China. So we talked a bit about that last time I was presenting at in this venue. Visit HTC, I'm back to them twice now in the last 2 years, and we're still learning a lot. We're working with them. We've written a case study on it, and that's accessible through the Harvard Case Clearinghouse. I think it's possible to get a copy of that as part of the master's class. If you're interested, let me know. And so we wrote a nice case study on how HTC manages its suppliers. And basically last time I just talked about taking an empathetic view on Chinese suppliers. You want to understand, because as a foreigner going into China, you are putting pressure on them to do things that is different from how they do business between other Chinese. You're coming in with a different business approach. We're not Chinese. And so sometimes you don't know what the reaction is. But there's one thing we are sure about, is there are reactions in terms of Chinese suppliers may be copying, or they may outsource cheaper materials without telling you. And that we've seen that happen with milk and toys. Having cheaper labour, we've seen that with toys. And US buyers are very big at monitoring the labour side. European buyers are bigger on the environmental. The US are bigger on the human resources protection. And so, or they might improve their processes. Ultimately, you want your supplier to improve their processes, to make things more efficiently for you. So it's cheaper next quarter, quarter after. But often they'll do the first three without telling you. How to get around that? You need to monitor more, and that's what the big buyers do. So I can give you a copy of that last talk I gave when I was at the Trobe University. So that's just a recap from the buyer point of view. And the idea was, look, you're putting pressure on the suppliers. You need to know their different options for reacting to that pressure. When you're aware of that, then you may be able to help the supplier avoid taking the lose-lose option, or win for them but lose for you. You want them to take the win-win option. So really understand how suppliers may respond to pressure that you give. Here's an example of, this is the iPhone, you all know the iPhone, and very well constructed. And the Chinese are very, very industrious, because they can make the iPhone too. Well, actually, the iPhone is made in China, but it's made under protection and the security of Foxconn, which is the main assembler for Apple. Well, here's the Chinese version. That's not made by Foxconn, but it's made by factories as part of the Sunzai network. It's a huge network in China, and they're producing 200, 300 million cell phones for the third world developing market, which at the moment is about 200 to 300 million a year, as large in terms of units as the first world market. And we're talking about Africa and India. It's a huge market, and they're making these things all the time. What do they look like? This is what it looks like on the outside. You may think it's an iPhone. It sounds like an iPhone. It looks like an iPhone, but it's different. And it's got dual SIM. It's got everything about it. I think it works. Sometimes it works.
I wouldn't recommend it. I bought one.
Yes, yes.
Didn't last 3 months.
Well, absolutely. So you got the idea, right?
Yeah.
And so you can hear that and then pass that around. That's our first exhibit for the night.
I'm not looking at it again.
That's all right. I bought it for an exhibit, not to use myself. And I've just bought the iPhone 5 copy, and that's currently being delivered to my office in Hong Kong for future seminars. But just to show they are ingenious and they are industrious and they can do things, and you just need to be aware of what they can do and help create a win-win situation. So what are we doing with the China Supply 1000 study? We're going to expos and we are interviewing them one by one. The interview takes about 1 hour, face to face. I have 14 part-time RAs at the moment, and they're doing the interviews in Putonghua, and I'm supervising. And I set them up with in the different booths that we go to. This is the expo in Shenzhen. About 20,000 people come to this expo. This is not as large as the Canton Fair. We're only focusing on electronics expos at the moment. And so little booths like this, and just go up to them. Oh, can you do this? No, but that's all right. It's like selling insurance. You've got to believe in your product, and you need to be passionate about how valuable it could be for the person that you're interviewing. And so we go through that, and it works. So far, 295, we had lots of fun, meet lots of great people, and you just find that just like you and I, they're in there, they're either doing sales, most of these people are sales managers, and they're just looking for buyers. And when they see us, they think, oh, another buyer. But then their mouth drops when they find out I'm just doing research and want to interview them. But we want to help them in the long term too. So we might give them training and things like that. How can they improve their processes? So we're having lots of fun doing that at the moment. You must have fun doing what you're doing. And so in the process of doing the interviews, we're also talking to industry. We've done presentations to ANCHAM, British Chamber of Commerce, Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce. I'll go back to Hong Kong and give a talk to the Young Presidents Association, Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and a few other private organisations who invite me to give a talk to. So the train's rolling along. Okay, what have we found so far in there? There's 238 I'm reporting on here. Just notice the end here. So far we've looked at the country of ownership, but predominantly most of the suppliers from China. What are they making? Most of them would just focus on electronics at the moment. We can expand to other industries, and many people think, well, I'm not really interested in electronics, I want to do something else with China, but that's fine, we've got to start somewhere, and we can learn from it. And basically they are supplying components to consumer electronics or larger industrial electronics. Sales to the largest customer, most of them have less than 30% of their sales to the largest customer. That's important. Why? You don't want to have too many sales to one customer, very high risk. But you don't want to have too many little customers, because you have huge transaction costs and probably limit your opportunities for development or value added that may come by having a large customer that may work with you. A lot of suppliers like to work with Apple for that purpose. Not to make money, but to actually learn and leapfrog in terms of moving up the value chain in technology. And it happens for a lot of suppliers that get the contract to supply to Apple. What do Chinese suppliers care about? At the last question we ask in this study, very interesting question, I think we should ask it to anyone we meet, is what is your #1 challenge? That's a very generic question, but when you think about it, it's a very interesting question. What is your #1 challenge? That's a very interesting question. So we ask these Chinese suppliers right at the end. They're tired for the interview, they think there's nothing left, and we ask them, oh, by the way, what is your #1 challenge? And guess what we find out? Cost control, #1 challenge. Sales growth, maintain market share. Okay? Cost control, sales growth, maintain market share, product development. Very few of them talked about the #1 challenge in terms of paradigm shift or delivery, going international, technology innovation, brand building. All of these areas where very few of the Chinese suppliers responded are things they should be doing more of to sustain their business into the future. You know, if you're just thinking about cost control, that's a very limited and short-term orientation, because you really can't control labour costs and material costs. In the past 3 years, labour costs have virtually doubled in China, and now China is not necessarily the cheapest factory in the world. And I was talking to, here's another exhibit, second exhibit for tonight. So you all know what this is, don't you? I think it works. Here we go, push the button. So when you travel overseas, you can have Europe, the Australian plug, you can buy these, right? Okay, so there's this Swiss Europe manufacturer. They have designed this same thing, but it's got a transformer inside. And what else would you like with your transformer? You'd like to have maybe a couple of USB plugs. Would you like that? Would you like that? So you plug your iPhone in and do all these sorts of things. And this is what they're designed and they're selling. Well, I met this manufacturer at the expo 2 weeks ago, and they've moved their assembly operations to Thailand. So why? Well, now Thailand, the labour is no more expensive than China, but we have greater IP control. And it's really interesting that 90% of the hits they get on their website are not from European markets where they're selling, they're not from Australia where they're selling, they're not from US where they are selling. The hits are coming from Guangzhou. Who do you think is looking up the website? Other Chinese manufacturers wanting to try and copy their design. Okay? So really interesting that China is not just the only place now for sourcing electronic components. And I really thought that they really had that ecosystem that would actually overcome, even though the labour costs went up. There's so many electronics manufacturers in one small area that you wouldn't move out, but companies are starting to move to other places in Southeast Asia. Very interesting. And that's 2 weeks old, that information. I thought I'd show this as you pass it around. You've probably seen it before anyway. Right? Don't say you didn't see any exhibits in this presentation. So we move on very quickly. So if cost control is their biggest problem, what are they doing? Well, bulk purchasing, collecting more quotations for comparison, boosting production efficiency, lowering the failure rate, doing nothing, decreasing the level of inventory. These are all things that we're probably teaching management accounting about how they're responding. Okay? There's nothing about how they're changing their strategy or thinking about how they can be more sustainable 5 years' time and 10 years' time. Some of them are working on the relationship with their customer. Alright, so what would a Taiwanese, so we go and visit, we're running a case study on a Taiwanese company at the moment, and that's 3L Coil, so I can tell you about that. And very lucky, while we're there, they said they just got a huge project, a huge contract with a major buyer. We're talking about one of the largest companies in the world, hint, hint, okay? And this major buyer came and inspected their factory. Okay, that's fine, that's what a lot of buyers do. But on top of that, they had a look at the sample, a lot of buyers do that. But on top of that, they wanted to look at their management system. Okay, do they have a management system in place? Are they organised? And guess what? So he rolls out, we've got a balanced scorecard. Would you like to see all the different reports we're producing each week, each month, and daily? Oh, that's enough, it's okay. And so they actually went beyond what buyers are expecting, especially some of the large, we talked about the large brand name buyers, international brand name buyers are expecting. If you go beyond that, it's very easy to get a supplier contract. So I talk about that to these Chinese suppliers, that they should not only get their production in order, their quality, but get their management systems in order. At least be seen that you're organised, your management system. And most of them are not organised. They have an ERP system in place. They're not using it in a systematic way. They're used to, through transactions with other Chinese parties in the value chain, they're used to cash-based transactions, 3 sets of accounting books, one for taxation, one for profit and one for something else. That's how it's been done business been done in China for many, many decades, or before that. Okay. So now they see, oh, these Western firms, they do have ERP systems. Okay, we put an ERP system in, but they're really not using it to its fullest extent. And so that's the next development they have to go through. So suppliers are struggling with getting their management systems in place. You, as a buyer, or you as a party that's exporting to China, you would like to see that they have some system in place because you'd like to see more transparency. Right? You'd like to see that. So one advice I would give to you is you're also a source of help to help them get the system, management system in place. You may be not just helping them distribute wine or whatever, but also help them in how to manage the distribution. And if you can help them that way, then they'll be more open to that win-win, thinking about the relationship. Voice of customer, brand confidence. For this fair course, I will quote you one thing that the owner said. Foxconn came to them, and they make inductors. You know, inductors like a resistor, transistor, capacitor, but it's not, it's an inductor. And so they make the inductors for iPads, and Foxconn came to them. It may not be for iPad, but maybe for some other products that they're supplying for. 5% cost down, and they said no. You can go to other suppliers. Our inductors are the best you can get on the market, and we're not dropping our price. So what would make them believe that they have better inductors than someone else? Because they have a management strategy in place, and they really believe, they have confidence in the quality of their production. So it really comes from within, that belief about your own quality, and then they're able to be in a better negotiating position. In the electronics industry, it is standard that buyers will look for 5% cost down every 3 months. Okay, it's not once a year. Okay, once a year we've got to do 5% less. No, it's every 3 months. It's very standard in the electronics industry. Okay, so moving on. So what other strategy did this Taiwanese supplier have? They give an A for their top performers, but they give an S for their very, very top performers. And it's sort of an incentive for their workers. Why is that important? Because there's another Taiwanese supplier I went to. They set up a 500-person factory just south of Shanghai. And this was about 6 years ago. Why did they set up there? Because they had relationships with the local government. Okay? That seems like a good reason to do that, right? But it wasn't the best area to access cheap labour, and they had to get immigrant labourers in. So in the last 3 years, they've had 2,500% turnover. No, not 2,500, 5 times turnover. So 500 factory, they've actually employed 2,500 people. That's 5 times 5%, 500%. So you must wonder about, well, how do you sustain these factories? Like this operator lost, talking about 60 million new Taiwan dollars they've lost in the last 18 months. How do they sustain that? And they wanted some advice when I was there. I said, well, maybe you have to change your location. But some of it's out of their control, because the other big thing that's happening in China, like when we want to export to China, we want to hit the big markets. So we go to Hong Kong, we go to Shanghai, because that's where all the consumers are, right, when you're exporting to China. But when you're importing from China, you've got to go further inland, because that's where the cheaper labour is, and that's where you get better prices for your goods, and hopefully the same quality. The China government now has a policy where they're moving a lot of factories. Any new foreign investment into China has to move inland, not on the seaboard. So what's the consequences for you if you're importing from China? Well, you have to pay more to get a container from inland to the port, and that costs a lot of money. Whereas before, it may have been 30 minutes to the port, now it's 3 hours, 10 hours to port, and that costs a lot more money. So there's a lot of extra costs now compared to 5 years ago. As a result, everything's just growing all over in China. Right, so just moving on, this was more a human resources strategy the Taiwanese company was doing. S for super glue. Okay, that was the example I gave you before. They've lost all this money. The labour costs are only $2,000 a month, but they still have 5 times turnover. What would happen is the immigrants, they would leave the factory and go back home, and they wouldn't come back after the holiday. And there's more factories setting up in their home, in their hometown. And so this is a big problem in China at the moment. We're talking about how do you actually sustain a factory. You want to have